Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Comedic Pedro, 1969. Growing up, our father, John S. Ray, was a big believer in the power and importance of sleep, especially for children. So we had strict bedtimes, and which I think was good. And I remember, kind of the funny part is during the summer here in the Cleveland area, when it gets dark at 9 o'clock, and as a little boy, I remember having bedtime at 7 and being in bed at 7 o'clock. And then, kids outside, remember we're outside playing, and I'd be in bed, and it would still very light out. And that same scenario was portrayed in a Simpsons episode where Ned Flanders at one point is taking care of the kids, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, and he puts them all to bed, and same thing, it's bright as day outside, and kids outside are running around playing. Now, in the summer of 1969, one night I stayed up past 11 o'clock, and to me that was a big deal. And it was because of a world history was taking place. I'm wearing a T-shirt, Great Achievements in U.S. Space History, from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, United States. And so there was a dramatic thing happened that summer. The Apollo 11 space flight landed 2 people on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Really something. July 20th, 1969. So I was with that's a strong memory I have. I was with my family on the porch, our screened porch in our home, and we were watching this happen. And I was like, wow, I'm up after 11 o'clock at night, and I'm up, and this was very exciting. So this is a really amazing thing. It was the Apollo lunar module, the Eagle, landed on the moon, and Neil Armstrong was the first man to step on the moon. And everyone's we're all attracted to fame, I suppose, and people have whatever different encounters with fame. And in our family, my sister Patricia, she danced with Neil Armstrong's son, and that's one of the things we brag about. And actually, after she danced with this guy, the son of Neil Armstrong, somebody said, "Hey, that's Neil Armstrong's son." So that was something. And now there were 3 astronauts on this mission. Michael Collins, remember as a kid, people felt sorry for him because he did not walk on the moon. He flew the command module Columbia in a lunar orbit. They had to come back to Earth, and he had their ride coming home. They landed in the Sea of Tranquility, and some people all over the millions were watching this on television, like 500 million people. And Armstrong's, we could see this guy walking on the moon and with his spacesuit, and then his famous words were, "One small step for a man." Now the word didn't come out, so it sounded like one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But actually, he was referring to himself. He was a man. But now the quote is, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," which is really the same thing, man and mankind. So it was really a man. So now they had launched July 16th from the Kennedy Space Center. It's where my T-shirt was from that area, on Merritt Island, Florida, and they returned to Earth and splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24th. So that was really something. Like I said, 500 million people watched that on television. Okay, now the picture for today's video is from the Wild Wild West TV show, which was an amazing television program which aired from 1965 to 1969, 104 episodes on CBS, and they called it. It was supposed to be James Bond on horseback. It was set in the United States during the presidency of U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant. And you had the main characters were Secret Service agents, James West, played by Robert Conrad, who was fearless and handsome, and Artemis Gordon, who was a brilliant gadgeteer and master of disguise. And then he was played by Ross Martin. And so these 2 fellows, they would solve crimes, protect the president, and foil plans of megalomaniacal villains who wanted to take over the United States. And what's very interesting, this is apparently science fiction and, in a Western. And Jules Verne-esque technology. In other words, they were taking that time period, and they had all this technology based on that time period, advanced technology for that era. And it was really cool. They had very high ratings. But the show was canceled as a concession to Congress because of television violence. So that was very unfortunate. So this was a Western, like a sort of a cowboy movie, along with it. It's like James Bond, an espionage thriller and science fiction for that era. A lot of humor and beautiful women, and the main villain, or the main villain was Dr. Miguelito Quixote Loveless, who was a dwarf, played by Michael Dunn. He appeared in 10 episodes. And again, an actor played President Ulysses S. Grant, which I thought was really cool. Now, the title sequence, when it started, there would be this sequence that would go through the same thing, and that was actually cool. There was a guy, a so-called hero, would strike a match and light a cigar, and then he was walking, and then a robber leaves the bank, and then the hero gives him a karate chop. And then there's a card sharps part of this, and then it would freeze. And a card sharp who was trying to take an ace of spades out of his boot in a card game, and the hero draws his gun, and then later there's a gunman there was something about a woman who was kissing a woman, and she's going to stab him. So anyway, that was kind of a cool thing. And the show had, it was set up in four quadrants of the TV, and after the first quadrant, the end of the first, it would sort of freeze this picture. It was a wonderful show, and I thought, this guy Jim West was just the coolest guy in the world because he was so calm, and he could handle any situation. And then they were a great pair, him and Artemis Gordon, who was kind of funny, who would help with all this crazy technology, and they were a great team. Artie was the funny guy, and Jim West was the straight guy. And then later they had the movie with Will Smith playing Jim West, and they had some rap music. That was a wonderful show. It's too bad they canceled it. Now, the events of 1969, January 12th, was the first Led Zeppelin album was released in the United States. On the same day, Super Bowl III was held, and the New York Jets, led by Joe Namath, defeated the Baltimore Colts, who had Johnny Unitas as their quarterback, 16-7. And of course, Namath made the famous quote. He was like sunbathing, wearing flip-flops, and he said, "We're going to win. I guarantee it." And they did win. Broadway Joe. So this was something. And it was funny because Joe Namath was this. I think he was probably, for me, like the coolest athlete of the 70s, and he had kind of long hair, was sort of a swinger, and then Johnny Unitas was this crew cut and all-American guy. But the Dolphins won, and this was kind of a victory for the AFL because they were an AFL team, and then of course the leagues had joined. The AFL joined the NFL. Okay, and on January 20th, Richard Nixon was inaugurated as the 37th U.S. president. On the 30th of January, the Beatles had their last public performance on the rooftop of Apple Records in London, England, Great Britain. February 4th, Yasser Arafat was elected president of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and he was the PL leader for many, many years, the group that's been in conflict with Israel. On the 8th of February was the last issue of the Saturday Evening Post was published after 147 years. So times were changing, probably because of television, and we still have a few of these old copies that my grandparents had. On the 9th of February, the first Boeing 747 jumbo jet flew. There were lots of 747s would fly over the years. March 3rd, Sirhan Sirhan admitted killing Robert F. Kennedy in the very tragic assassination in 1968. On March 10th, The Godfather, novel by Mario Puzo, was distributed to booksellers, and of course they made this famous trilogy based on the book, The Godfather trilogy. On the 17th of March, Golda Meir became the first female president of Israel. On the 20th of March, John Lennon and Yoko Ono married in Gibraltar, which is, between near Spain and Morocco, which opened the gateway to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, they became quite a couple, those two, John Lennon and Yoko Ono. On the 28th of March, Dwight Eisenhower died, great hero of the Second World War in Europe, leading American forces on D-Day, and U.S. President, elected in 52 and 56 for 8 years. So most of the 50s, Dwight Eisenhower was U.S. President. April 8th, the Montreal Expos debuted as the first Major League Baseball team to be located outside the United States in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, French Canada. April 9th, the Harvard University Administration building was seized by a number of students, mostly from the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, and this was rather unfortunate. It was part of this, the anti-Vietnam War movement and the sort of youth rebellion. 45 were injured during the time when they held the building, and there were 184 arrested. On May 10th was the Battle of Dong Ap Bia in Vietnam, whom American soldiers called Hamburger Hill. On May 26th, John Lennon wrote the song Give Peace a Chance, which was an anti-Vietnam War song. June 17th, Boris Spassky became the world chess champion. July 14th, in the United States, the U.S. $500 bill, $1,000 bill, $5,000 bill, and $10,000 bills, all of those were withdrawn from circulation, so they were no longer being used. Kind of funny. On July 16th, the Apollo 11 lifted off from Florida on this mission, the first, which led to the first human beings walking on the moon. July 18th, Chappaquiddick Island, Massachusetts, U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, who both had been assassinated. He was driving a car. He drove a car off a bridge. Very tragic. And he was married. Now, his passenger was a young lady named Mary Jo Kopechne, who died in this accident. Kennedy was able to get out, and this Mary Jo Kopechne died. And this really ruined his political career, because it really looked bad. He's with a woman who's not his wife, and then he didn't report it for a while, and this is a real tragedy. On July 20th, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Really something. 500 million people watched, the largest ever TV audience. On August 8th, the Beatles, there's a photo of the Beatles, John Lennon, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, and Paul McCartney walking across Abbey Road with this so-called zebra crossing. And I think they were all barefoot. On the 9th of August, the Charles Manson family murders took place. Very, very, very troubling. Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski and 4 others were murdered, and Manson wasn't there. This Charles Manson had this like a cult, and they really believed in him, that he was this great man or great savior, and they committed these murders that somehow they thought believed that would lead to a race war, and then somehow lead to a positive future. But it was very, very troubling, very, very tragic that these young people had gotten under the influence of this very bad guy. On the 15th to the 18th of August, the Woodstock Festival was held in New York State. Top rock musicians performed. This was really, probably the most famous rock music festival in history. And I think Jimi Hendrix performed. It rained. There were all these young people there. It's a famous scene. Now, down the street, right next to us, is the Normandy Senior Citizen Place, and of course, it was named after the defining event of my parents' generation, the invasion of Normandy in June 6, 1944. And I thought, well, they're getting their generation's disappearing because they're dying, and I thought, well, maybe one day, what's the defining event for my generation? I thought, I was thinking Woodstock. Maybe they'll rename the Normandy the Woodstock. September 1st, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi had a coup d'etat, took power in Libya, North Africa. Yeah, and he became a pretty bad dictator for many, many years, up until only a few years ago. And really, he's created a lot of trouble. He's made a lot of trouble in the Philippines, bringing in weapons to promoting Islamic jihad in Mindanao. On the 13th of September, the first episode of Scooby-Doo, this cartoon, aired on CBS. The 20th of September, John Lennon announced that he was leaving the Beatles. So this was really unfortunate because they were such a popular group. The 22nd of September, Willie Mays hit his 600th home run, the first guy since Babe Ruth to hit 600 home runs. So Willie Mays was a tremendous baseball star in the 1960s, and actually in the 50s. On the 23rd of September, the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid aired, starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford. That became a very popular movie. On the 26th of September, the Beatles released the album Abbey Road, which became, some consider, their best album. Excuse me. Index cards. Okay. And the same day, the Brady Bunch, the first episode of the Brady Bunch aired on ABC. I wasn't too crazy about the Brady Bunch because they had this sort of ideal family, you know. Maybe a lot of people. I remember seeing on TV a guy complaining like, "Oh, my family wasn't like the Brady Bunch." Well, whose family was? Nobody's family was like them. October 5th, Monty Python's Flying Circus aired on BBC One in Great Britain. I remember some of my friends really getting into this show. Kind of a nerdy show and British humor. On the 16th of October, the New York Mets defeated the Baltimore Orioles in the 1969 World Series. The Miracle Mets. Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman, Tug McGraw, guys like that. You know, there's this movie came out, well, been a while now, called Frequency, where this character, there's like time communication through time, and from the current time back to 1969, and this guy talks with his father who had died in 1969, and then he's trying to save. It's a wonderful movie. He tries to save his life, and at one point, it's very complicated. But at one point, his father gets arrested in 1969, but his son's telling him all this stuff that's going to happen, and they don't believe him. You know, I think, oh, he's crazy. And at one point, he says, Tommy Agee's going to get hit by a pitch, and the umpire won't believe it, and he'll think it was. But he'll say, "Oh, check the ball. It was a check for shoe polish on the ball." I don't think players have shoe polish on their shoes anymore. So the umpire checked the ball, and Tommy Agee went to first. And then this guy's arrested, and then he's said this is going to happen, and it does happen. And then this black policeman, who's actually his friend, has a big smile, so he's starting to believe this might be true. I told that story to John Thorne here in Cleveland at the 19th Century Cleveland Baseball Symposium, and he's like, he said, you know, it wasn't Tommy Agee, it was Cleon Jones. Anyway, so that was an amazing. The Miracle Mets, you know, they were an expansion team. In 1962, they had the worst record in baseball history, like 40-120. And then 7 years later, they won the World Series. So this was kind of vindication for all the New York Giants and Brooklyn Dodgers fans whose hearts were broken when the Giants moved to San Francisco and the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles. November 9th, American Indians occupied Alcatraz Island. And then, of course, by this time, I believe it was no longer being used as a prison. It was a famous prison in San Francisco Bay, where you had guys like that Al Capone had spent time. And supposedly this was a positive development in helping American Indians to develop self-esteem and pride in being American Indians instead of shame for what really they'd been through. On November 10th, the first episode of Sesame Street aired on the National Education Network, National Education Television, NET. You know, you have these guys, Ernie and Bert. You know, this program supposed to help little kids to learn their letters and numbers and help them before starting school. This became, and I think it's still on, as far as I know. Now, another thing that did happen in 1969, the date is unknown, is the first Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips restaurant opened in Columbus, Ohio. And we had one in here on Detroit Road. I remember a friend of mine, classmate of mine, George Manos, was the manager, and I went in there to apply one day back in, I think, 1980, and he said, "Oh, Pete, you know, this is not a summer job. We need people that are going to stay, not just for the summer." And a funny story is, years later, my mother had a coupon for a free Coke at Arthur Treacher's. My mother, she had a British background. She liked fish and chips, which is very British. So I went there, I got her food, the fish and chips, and the Coke, and then I was driving home down on Linda Street, driving north from Detroit to Lake Road. this Coke fell over, and then I reached over to get the Coke, and the car went off the road, and I drove over these boulders. There were $1,000 in damage to the car to get this free Coke. So that was very unfortunate. Now, in 1969, in my family, my parents both turned 45. They were very busy people, good people. Yeah, my dad worked hard, and they did so much for the community. And we were going to on these vacations to the Bahamas in the spring in the Easter vacation, and staying on this Cistern Key. And we were renting a house there, owned by the Rummages. So my parents were real busy people. They had a lot of energy. Of course, they were 45, so it's just still pretty good when you think about it. Now, my brother Mark turned 17 in 1969, and he started the first 6 months of the year in grade 10, and then in the high school, Rocky River High School, and then in the fall he was in grade 11. So he was moving through his high school years. And then Pamela R. Ray, the next in our family, she was in grades 9 and 10. She turned 15, but she was 1 year behind him. And they were in the high school orchestra. I remember when I went to the high school myself, and I went to the high school myself, and we went to a lot. Yeah, as a boy, we went to a lot of these orchestra concerts that Mark and Pam were involved in playing for the high school orchestra. Mark playing the violin, and Pamela the cello. Patricia turned 12. She was still at Kensington Elementary School, starting the first 6 months in grade 5, and in the fall grade 6. So that was her last year at Kensington, and I was 2 years behind. I turned 9, and I was in grades 3 and 4. So Patricia and I, or we called her Patty at that time, we were both together at Kensington. And like I said, I remember that that's July 1969, staying up late to watch the first man on the moon. So we were a real busy family. The 1960s were coming to an end. Yeah, and there was all this. Yeah, they had this. The Vietnam War was very controversial. A lot of protests, and it was a very tragic war. And I remember, watching TV, the news on TV at night, and the Vietnam War was a big part of it. So anyway, so that concludes today's presentation, Comedic Pedro, 1969. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.